Well, a very warm welcome back to Classic Dirt Bike TV, and as you can see, we've managed to leave the confines of the studio to attend our first race event, and this is the Scottish Twinshock Scramble Club's Round 1 event here at Powmill. Now the track is just behind these trees here, although this is quite early in the morning and it's a bit overcast with mist at the moment, but the forecast is for a fantastic sunny day here at Powmill, so we will be covering some of the racing here and of course showing you some of the nice bikes that have come to race at this event. Now we will be attending more racing events throughout 2021, so I do hope you'll continue to subscribe to my channel in order that you don't miss out on any of the bikes or the racing from this year. So without any further delay, let's just take our usual walk around the paddock and have a look at some of the nice bikes that have turned up to race at this Round 1 event here at Powmill. Okay, first up we're going to take a look at this very nice 250 Can-Am. Another lovely looking machine, and this bike used to belong to the late Ian Robertson before his tragic accident in 2019. Now the bike is owned and ridden by Billy Pentland, and Billy has given Ian's bike a little bit of a freshen up since he purchased it, so he was looking forward to racing it here at Powmill. Now back in the day, these 250 Can-Ams, of course powered by these two-stroke Rotax engines. Bombardier of course on the side of the engine, but Bombardier of course bought over Rotax at the time, so they were using their own manufacturer's name on these Rotax motors. But Ian was very quick on this bike when he used to race it, and it's nice to see that somebody's picked up the bike and not using it as a museum piece of any kind, but still taking part and racing the bike on the racetrack. Now this 250 Can-Am is just one of two bikes that Billy races at these Scottish Twinshock and Evolution events. Billy also has a very nice YZ 490 Yamaha that he also races, but as you know, the YZ 490s can be a bit of a handful if the tracks are tight and twisty, and they're much better suited to these little light 250 Can-Am, so that's the main reason that Billy tends to race this on these tight and twisty tracks. Now as you can see, the weather in the background, very misty for a Sunday morning, but as it turned out, the remainder of the day was absolutely superb for racing. And don't forget, you can see some of the racing action from this event in my next video posting, so look out for that. So anyway, that's Billy Pentland's very nice Can-Am 250 Twinshocker. A lovely little bike that was owned by the late Ian Robertson. Okay, next up we're going to take a quick look at Sam Sibbald's quite nice looking TT500 Yamaha. Now for the sake of argument, this is not, I repeat, not an original TT500 bike, but Sam has made a few modifications to his old four-stroke racer, and I'm sure that swing arm he told me was from a Kawasaki bike. So as you can see, it's not an original bike, but you know, these big TT500 four-stroke Yamaha motors are just about unbreakable when it comes to racing in classic and vintage race events. But those rear shocks fitted on Sam's machine are certainly the longest looking pair of rear shocks that I've seen on a Twinshock bike for a long time. But Sam obviously has had them specially made to suit either the bike or his own riding requirements. But what can you say about these big TT 4-stroke Yamaha motors that hasn't already been said? A fantastic old engine to power an old vintage Twinshocker. Now these old TTs of course had the oil in the frame for the engine. You can just see the filler cap just ahead of the fuel cap there, where you would fill the frame with oil and it would then be pumped around the engine, and a nice bespoke seat made for Sam's machine. Now the fuel tank certainly looks an original tank, although the graphics are now long gone, but it does have a few dents and dings in it from its years on the racetrack. But of course this is a weekend racer. This is not a garage queen. This bike gets used very regular at classic and twin shock race events. Now another look at that what looks like an alloy swing arm, but I'm sure that Sam told me years ago that this was from a Kawasaki race bike. But you may have already seen this bike in action on some of my Scottish Classic racing videos, where Sam has won many races on this big TT500, and it's a nice old racer, and certainly nice to look at here at this round 1 event here at Powmill. And so from one old campaigner to another, this is Tom Noble's old GM 500 Myco. Now again, this is another race bike that's used very regularly, as you can see, and Tom says it's an almost full-time job trying to keep this bike racing, because throughout the years he's made many running repairs to the broken frame and other bits and pieces, but he still manages to keep this old thing going and still racing on the racetrack. Now I think the bike is either an 85 or possibly even an 86 model, and you can see where Tom's been repairing the down tube off the frame there with his welding skills. But these are quite hard bikes to keep running on the track these days, and you don't see too many people still using these as race bikes, but Tom certainly does use this bike on a regular basis. But back in the day, these old GM 500s were pretty quick machines, but of course, as I said, Myco at the time were in a very bad way financially, and the company was more or less bankrupt by this time. But it's still nice to see one of these old GM 500s still being used as a vintage race machine. Now the old blue plastics looking a bit worse for wear after many years on the racetrack, but these were still the days when Myco was now using disc brakes on their race bikes. Gone of course were the old drums from the old 490 Mega 2 era. Some would say that the drums were slightly better than these disc brakes, and it looks like Tom's fitted a brand new pair of brake pads to his caliper there, so he was looking to do the business at this round 1 event here at Powmill. And as you can see, the front brake also was a disc configuration. But if you attended a Twinshock or Evolution event these days, you'd be quite hard pressed to see one of these old GM 500s still taking part in racing. And this old expansion chamber looks like it's been through the motocross wars, but nevertheless it looks like it's still intact and ready to fight another day. But it's nice to see another one of these old GM 500s, and it's thanks to Tom Noble, who continues to use this bike as his number 1 race machine. Okay, next up we have this quite nice looking CR500 Honda Evolution bike. Now this belongs to Ian Clark. Now you may remember that we've featured many of Ian's bikes here on my YouTube channel in the past, and every one of them is usually always immaculate, and Ian's had this particular CR500 Honda done up in these old Castrol type graphics, which personally I think is great to see on one of these Evolution bikes. Now, I'm not entirely sure as to who actually built the bike, as Ian usually just gets the professionals to build his machines, and then Ian races them. But it's a beautifully prepared machine with this big massive 500 two-stroke Honda motor in the chassis. But of course, ask anybody who knows about these 500 Hondas and they'll tell you that these are a real man's racing bike. If you want power, then these CR500s certainly have more power than your average rider could handle. But these Castrol graphics on the tank are certainly a throwback to a way back in the day when many of the old classic bikes used to have these Castrol graphics and stickers on their machines. But it's certainly the bike to be riding at this round 1 event here at Powmill, because the track does tend to get quite bumpy later in the day, and this Honda suspension system will be able to cope with anything that the bumpy Powmill track will throw at this big bruiser of a machine. But I must say it's quite nice to see one of these big CR500 Hondas decked out in different graphics rather than the standard red and white motif that we're normally used to. But we may do a more comprehensive video on Ian's CR500 in a later video here on my YouTube channel, so make sure that you look out for that. Now, of course, Showa Honda forks on the front. Now, these are very capable suspension units for this CR500 machine, and they'll certainly cope with any of the bumps that this Powmill racetrack will throw at it. But these particular shots were basically just a smash and grab on the day, because Ian was patiently waiting to get his bike scrutineered for racing, so I had to just grab one or two of these shots. But like I said, we may do a more intricate video on Ian's fantastic looking CR500 in a later video posting here on Classic Dirt Bike TV. But it's quite nice just to see Ian's bike sitting here in the paddock prior to racing, but a very nice looking and very different Honda CR500 Evolution machine. Okay, next up we're going to take a quite brief look at Malcolm Miller's Honda XR 250. Now, this is another interesting machine. Now, it's not an original XR250 as Malcolm was telling me, but it's a bit of a mishmash of XR Honda parts, but nevertheless it's a quite nicely put together machine. Now, the bike uses one of these Honda 4-stroke twin port single cylinder engines, are very popular and very tough little 4-stroke motor. A 4-valve cylinder head, of course, as we said, twin exhaust pipes, but of course a single cylinder, as most of these older XRs are. But this is a quite nice looking old 4-stroke twin shocker with the different tank graphics and side panels, but it's nice to take a look at something slightly different from the normal XR250s, and this bike of Malcolm's certainly fits that particular niche. Now, it was Malcolm there pointing out that the bike has Marzocchi piggyback shocks on the back of the bike. Now, it looks like a standard Honda XR250 fuel tank there, with those quite nice looking graphics on the side, And Malcolm was also telling me that he's going to be racing this bike in the over 50s class at this round 1 event here at Powmill. But nonetheless, a quite nice, purposeful looking 250 4-stroke racer. Not an original bike, of course, but Malcolm did tell me that it was made up using many other different types of Honda XR race parts. But nonetheless, a very nice looking machine and something different to take a look at here on Classic Dirt Bike TV. Okay, our next featured bike is Kenny Hope's quite nice looking KX 250 Kawasaki. Now, Kenny told me that this was the result of his lockdown efforts over the last year or so, and he's given his old Kawasaki a complete makeover, and I must say it looks absolutely stunning and ready to go at this round 1 event here at Powmill. But Kenny said that he gave the bike a complete makeover from the frame up, so everything that needed done on the bike was made ready for this round 1 event. And Kenny was racing this bike in the over 50s class, so you can see this bike in action on the track in my next video posting, which will of course be some of the racing from this round 1 event here at Powmill. So make sure you retune to Classic Dirt Bike TV to take a look at that. Now, as I remember, Kenny told me that this was a 1990 model, and as you know, when these were launched back in that year, these were absolutely fantastic machines, and everybody that loved their motocross wanted one of these KX 250 Kawasaki's, and this 2-stroke power plant was certainly one of the best engines of that time. And as I remember, these were not too quick off the start line, but once these 2-strokers got into their sweet spot in the power band, these things took off like a scalded cat, and they could certainly propel you to the number 1 podium spot at the end of the day. Now, that Fresco expansion chamber is of course a replacement to the Kawasaki original, but I must admit Kenny's done a fantastic job on this little machine. And again, these 2-stroke Kawasaki motors were fitted with Kawasaki's KIPS system, or Kawasaki Integrated Power Valve system. Now, upside down forks, of course, for 1990, and these, I think these were 41mm Kayabas that were fitted to these bikes back in the day, but these were quite good suspension systems and had plenty scope for adjustment. But at the controls end of the bike, it looks like Kenny's fitted a nice pair of these Pro Taper race bars and all their associated cables and throttle gasser and levers. And I see Kenny's also fitted a kill switch on that left hand side. But it's a beautiful looking bike, you have to admit, and Kenny's done a fantastic job putting this bike into this superb race condition. And as I said, not only does this bike look good, it's pretty quick on the track as well, as you'll find out if you see part 2 of this video with the racing highlights from this Scottish Twinshock and Evolution race event at Powmill, which will be coming up next here on my channel. So there you have it, a very nice looking KX 250 Kawasaki. That's Kenny Hope's machine, and he'll be riding that in the over 50s class in my next video. Okay, our next pair of Evolution bikes are Robbie Allen's 1989-1990 Suzuki RM 250s. Now, this is a nice pair of yellow screamers. It's quite rare to see one of these 250 RM Suzuki slingshots at a race meeting, but to see two at the same time is quite a novelty at these kind of Evolution race events. Now, Robbie told me that his main race bike was actually made up of parts from a 1989 and 1990 model, and the Suzuki motors of course had that AETC system, which was an abbreviation for the automatic exhaust timing control, which was basically another version of a two-stroke power valve. Now, these Slingshot 250 Suzukis of course had the instantly recognisable blue frame, made of steel of course, and the alloy rear swing arm, but this seat of course is not standard and quite unconventional for a race bike, but nevertheless each to their own of course, but it looks like it could still do a decent job. Again, your conventional upside down type forks, and I think these were Showas that were fitted to Robbie's machines, but quite a nice pair of RM250 Slingshot Suzukis. Like I said, it's quite rare to see even one of these bikes now taking part in Twinshock and Evolution racing events, but this is a nice pair of Suzukis belonging to Scotsman Robbie Allen. So that's Robbie Allen's RM250 Suzukis. Okay, next up we're going to take a look at this very nice Mark Kenny's C&J Honda XR600 Special. Now this bike is basically made up from a hand-built C&J frame, and the geometry of the frame is based around the parameters of the legendary 490 Myco from 1981. Now it has a Myco Thor rear aluminium swing arm, and the engine of course is based around an 88 XR600 Honda motor. Now the engine is just basically your standard RF VC 4 valve 4-stroke Honda engine. It also has a Nicosol plated barrel, but basically this is just a stock motor, and as you can see it's quite a formidable lump to be sitting in that lovely hand sculpted C&J frame. Now again, these 4-stroke RFVC 4-valve Honda motors are a single cylinder, but of course a twin port cylinder head with these twin exhausts coming from either side of the cylinder head, and which of course go onto these twin pipes at the rear. Now the engine also has a 5-speed gearbox, and of course the oil for the engine is housed in the frame. Now the forks on Mark's bike are these 43mm Kayabas, and the front hub on his bike is taken from a Suzuki machine. Now the bike did take Mark quite a while to put together, but now that the bike's finished it looks absolutely stunning. And of course you can hear and see this bike in action on the track in my next video posting here on YouTube, and there's a fantastic sound that comes out of these stainless steel tailpipes when this big Honda 4-stroker gets fired up. Now the business end of the suspension at the rear is a pair of these quite good quality Maxton piggyback rear shocks, and these are fully adjustable for rebound and damping. But another fantastic looking 4-stroke twin shocker, and as I said earlier, don't forget to take a look at this bike in action on the racetrack in my next video here on Classic Dirt Bike TV. Okay, we're going to finish this paddock walkabout at this round 1 event at Powmill with a look at Jim Baxter's Honda CR125 Evolution bike. Another fine looking Honda 125 Evolution machine, this bike of Jim Baxter's, and those front forks on Jim's bike were one of a set of forks that were used by GP rider Sean Simpson. Now these little 125 Honda Screamers can certainly pack a punch for just being a little short stroking 125 engine. Now I'm sure that Jim told me that this was a 1990 model, and these were extremely quick little 125s in their day. In fact, there still are very competitive bikes for racing, and of course these engines had Honda's HPP, or Honda Power Port power valve system in the cylinder, but they could certainly pack a punch, these little 125s. And as I mentioned before, these forks on Jim's bike were used by GP rider Sean Simpson at one or two events, and Jim now uses them on his little 125 machine. And as I recall about these bikes back in the day, the original standard forks on these CR125s were pretty abysmal straight from the factory, but in sharp contrast, this aluminium box section ProLink rear suspension was one of the better rear suspension systems on a motocross machine for that particular year, and Honda has certainly made a good job of designing this fantastic ProLink rear suspension. Now a nice pair of Acerbis handguards fitted to Jim's machine, and you'll certainly need it at this Powmill racetrack because it does get very stony and very bumpy later in the day's proceedings. But a nice pair of wide foot pegs with those little spikes to just try and help your boot stay glued to that footrest. But of course a 6-speed gearbox on these little 125s, and it will certainly keep you busy dancing up and down on this shifter when that little 125 two-stroke motor gets into its sweet spot. But there are quite a lot of Evolution bikes at this Scottish Twinshock event, and it's mainly Twinshock and Evolution bikes that make up the majority of the bikes that race at this event, so that's one reason why there are quite a few Evolution racers in this particular video. But I do hope you've enjoyed taking a look around the paddock at this round 1 event here at Powmill, and don't forget you can see quite a few of these bikes in action on the track in my next up and coming video here on Classic Dirt Bike TV. So thanks again for watching, and don't forget, if you like what you see, then please continue to subscribe to my channel.